Rick Stevens laughed. Not a polite laugh. Not an awkward chuckle. A sharp, loud, dismissive laugh. The kind of laugh that tells you everything without saying a word. You don't belong here. You're wasting my time. It was Tuesday morning, March 15th, 2011, inside Stevens John Deere, Marshalltown, Iowa. Rick Stevens owned this place. Had owned it since 1989. Built it into the biggest John Deere dealership in the county. Millions in sales every year. New tractors. Shiny floors. Glass offices. Rick believed he could spot money the moment it walked through the door. And the man standing in front of him didn't look like money. Walter Price was 77 years old. Dirty work boots. Faded Carhartt jacket with grease stains baked into the fabric. Old jeans with stitch patches. Hands rough. Nails black with soil. Rick didn't even remember the last time Walter had been in the dealership. Maybe once every few years. Small parts. Filters. Bolts. Not important. Walter stood calmly across the desk and said one sentence. I want to buy 12 John Deere tractors today. Rick laughed. 12 tractors? He leaned back in his leather chair. You want to buy 12 tractors today? Yes. Rick shook his head, still smiling. Do you even know what 12 tractors cost? Depends on the models. Rick waved his hand. Let's be generous. $40,000 each for decent used ones. That's almost $500,000. Closer to $560,000, Walter said quietly. I need specific models. Rick's smile faded a little. This wasn't a joke. Walter pulled a folded piece of paper from his jacket and placed it on the desk. Rick unfolded it. 3 John Deere 4440s, 2 4640s, 3 4430s, 2 4230s, 2 4020s. Specific years listed next to each one. Rick looked up. This is very specific. I know what I need. Rick exhaled slowly. I don't keep 12 used tractors sitting around. I'd have to source most of these. Do you have any of them? Rick checked his inventory screen. 2 4440s, 1 4430, 1 4640. For total. I have 4 that match, Rick said. But let's be honest, you can't afford this. Walter didn't argue. I'll take those 4 today, he said. How long to get the other 8? Rick stared at him. For tractors alone will cost over $160,000. Walter reached into his jacket, pulled out a plain green checkbook. How much of the 4 you have? Rick hesitated. Then read the numbers straight from the screen. 162,400. Walter wrote the check. Slowly, carefully, tore it out, placed it on the desk. Rick picked it up. $162,400. Payable to Stevens John Deere. Signed, Walter Price. Rick swallowed. I need to verify this. Of course. Rick called the bank. 2 minutes later, his face changed. Yes, I understand, thank you. He hung up. Walter Price had over $2.3 million in his checking account. Rick looked at Walter differently now. You have $2.3 million in cash? Yes. Rick almost asked how, stopped himself. Instead, he said, You still want the other 8? Yes. That'll be another $300,000 at least. That's fine. Rick's mind was racing. This was the biggest used equipment deal of his career. 12 tractors, Rick said slowly. But why? Walter sat down. I'm not buying them for myself. Rick frowned. I'm buying them for other farmers. Silence. You're giving them away? Some free, some at cost. 0 interest. Rick didn't understand. Why? Walter looked straight at him. Because in 1979, I watched a good farmer lose everything. Rick leaned forward. Walter continued. His name was Harold Thompson. Debt crushed him. The bank took his land, auctioned his equipment. Walter paused. I bought one of his tractors that day, not because I needed it, because I understood something. Rick listened. When farmers fail, equipment becomes cheap, and when equipment is cheap, opportunity appears. Rick felt a strange tightness in his chest. This started in 1979, Walter said, and it's been happening quietly ever since. Walter leaned back. And Rick, you laughed at me today because you thought you knew who I was. Rick didn't reply. Walter stood up. I want those 4 tractors delivered today. Source the other 8 within 2 weeks. Rick nodded slowly. Yes, we'll do that. Walter turned toward the door. Oh, and Rick. Rick looked up. You should never laugh before you listen. Walter walked out. Rick sat there holding the check. He didn't realize it yet, but that laugh had just taught him the most expensive lesson of his life. Rick Stevens didn't move for a long time. The check was still in his hand. $162,000. Signed. Valid. Real. But Rick's mind wasn't on the money anymore. It was on one question. How does a man in dirty boots quietly hold millions and give tractors away? 2 hours later, Rick drove one of the tractors himself. He wanted to see where Walter Price lived, wanted to understand what he had missed. Walter's farm sat miles outside town. No gate, no fancy sign, just gravel, fields, and old sheds. Rick expected chaos. What he saw instead was order. Every building straight, every machine maintained. Not new, but clean. Not flashy, but ready. 17 tractors sat in different sheds. All operational, all older models, all paid for. Walter met him near the machine shed. You didn't need to deliver it yourself, Walter said. I wanted to, Rick replied. They stood there for a moment, wind moving across the fields. Why so many tractors? Rick asked. You only farm 2,000 acres. Walter smiled. I don't farm with them, he said. I store opportunity. Rick didn't understand. Walter walked him into a shed and pointed. That one, he said, bought in 1983 at an auction. $8,000. Rick looked closer. That tractor was worth at least $35,000 now. I've been doing this since 1979, Walter said calmly. Whenever farms fail, equipment floods a market. Banks panic. Prices collapse. Rick listened. I buy only proven models. Pay cash. Maintain them myself. Walter turned and looked Rick straight in the eyes. While everyone else chased bigger land with debt, I chased patience. Rick felt uncomfortable. How did this turn into millions, he asked. Walter didn't answer immediately. Instead, he told a story. In 1978, my father lost his farm, Walter said. Debt, foreclosure, auction. Rick stayed silent. I watched strangers bid on our lives, Walter continued. People laughing, looking for deals. Walter's voice stayed steady. That day taught me 2 things. Never owe anyone your survival, and never forget what desperation looks like. Walter walked to another shed. By 1981, my land was paid off. No equipment loans. No bank leverage. Rick blinked. Paid off in 10 years? Walter nodded. I saved what others spent. Rick started doing the math in his head. That savings became my buying power, Walter said. When land crashed in the 80s, I bought. Cash. Walter pointed across the fields. I bought 11 farms between 1982 and 1995. Foreclosures, estate sales, divorce sales. Rick swallowed. All paid cash. Yes. Rick finally understood. The tractors weren't the wealth. They were tools. Then came the next step, Walter said. Helping people. Rick turned. In 1990, a young man came to me, Walter said. No credit, no equipment, no chance. Walter smiled faintly. I sold him a tractor at cost. 0 interest. 5 years. Rick leaned in. He succeeded, Walter said, then helped others. Walter looked back at Rick. I didn't build wealth by keeping things, he said. I built it by letting others grow. Rick felt the weight of that sentence. And today, Walter continued, I'm buying 12 tractors. Rick nodded slowly. For 12 young farmers, Walter said. So they don't start the way my father ended. Rick looked across the fields again. He realized something uncomfortable. Walter didn't look rich because wealth was never the point. Walter looked poor because impact doesn't need applause. Rick exhaled. I laughed at you, he said quietly. Walter shrugged. Most people do. Rick looked down at the gravel. What happens next? He asked. Walter's eyes sharpened. Next, he said, you'll deliver 8 more tractors. Rick nodded. And then, Walter added, you'll start seeing farmers differently. Rick felt it already happening, because once you understand how real wealth is built, you can never unsee it. CK said. She froze. You mean the one Mr. Price mentioned? Her voice cracked. Rick nodded. A 1979 John Deere 4440 rolled off the trailer. Clean, solid, worth nearly $40,000. Sarah covered her mouth. I can't afford this, she whispered. Walter stepped forward. You're not buying it, he said. I'm giving it to you. Her knees buckled. Rick had sold hundreds of tractors in his life. He had never seen this reaction. Not excitement, not celebration. Relief. Pure, overwhelming relief. I've saved for 6 years, Sarah said through tears. I was still short. Every bank said no. Walter placed the keys in her hand. Now you can farm, he said. That's all that matters. Rick watched something break open inside her. This wasn't charity. This was permission. Over the next 10 days, Rick delivered 11 more tractors. Every stop told the same story. Different faces. Same struggle. Young farmers. Good farmers. Locked out by banks. Crushed by timing. One man worked construction for 8 years at night. One woman rented land but couldn't mechanize. One son watched his father lose everything and refused to quit. Walter didn't ask about credit scores. He asked about character. How do you maintain equipment? Do you show up every day? Will you help the next one? Some tractors were gifts. Some were sold at cost. Every deal was 0 interest. Rick started noticing something. None of these farmers were reckless. They weren't lazy. They weren't failures. They were early. And early looks exactly like broke. By the last delivery, Rick felt sick. Not from regret. From realization. How many people like this did I turn away? He asked Walter. Walter didn't answer immediately. Then he said, as many as your assumptions allowed. That night, Rick couldn't sleep. He replayed every customer he had laughed off, every dirty jacket, every quiet man who didn't look profitable. He had confused wealth with polish. The final tractor went to Michael Chun, the same man Walter had helped 21 years earlier. Michael was no longer struggling. He owned land now, hired workers, mentored others. Walter handed him the keys. You don't owe me anything, Walter said. Michael shook his head. I already paid you back, he said, by becoming who you believed I could be. Rick stood there stunned. This wasn't a transaction. It was a chain. Walter turned to Rick. This is why I stayed invisible, he said. If people knew what I had, they'd ask for money instead of understanding. Rick finally understood the laugh. Walter hadn't been offended by it. He expected it, because real wealth doesn't announce itself. It waits. The laugh cost Rick more than he realized. Not money, not reputation. Time, years of misunderstanding who actually mattered. A week after the last tractor was delivered, Rick called an emergency meeting. Sales managers, finance heads, service leads, people who had worked under him for decades. I want a list, Rick said. Every farmer we turned away in the last 5 years. Every deal we rejected because someone didn't look right. The room went quiet. One manager laughed nervously. You serious? Rick didn't smile. Dead serious. They brought the list 2 days later. It was longer than Rick expected. A lot longer. Names he recognized. Farms he'd driven past. People he'd dismissed in under 5 minutes. Rick stared at it and felt something heavy settle in his chest. This list wasn't lost sales. It was lost lives. He drove to the first name on the list himself. A man in his early 40s. Small operation. Old equipment. The man didn't even invite Rick inside. You told me my farm wasn't viable, the man said, so I learned to survive without you. Rick apologized. The man nodded, but he didn't forgive. That happened again and again. Some farmers accepted the apology. Some didn't. Rick realized something painful. You don't get to undo disrespect on your timeline. Walter never once asked Rick to apologize. Never once asked him to change. Walter just showed him the truth. That wealth hides. That dignity is quiet. That the people doing the most good often look like they're doing the least. Rick started volunteering with the foundation, not for credit, for correction. He reviewed applications, visited farms, helped young farmers choose equipment that wouldn't bury them in debt. Every time he handed over keys, he remembered that first laugh, and every time it hurt a little less, because pain, when listened to, becomes wisdom. Walter passed away 8 years later. No headlines, no media frenzy, just farmers, hundreds of them, at the funeral. Rick stood in the back. He didn't feel worthy of the front. One by one, farmers stood and spoke, not about tractors, about second chances, about being seen, about a man who helped quietly and left loudly changed lives behind him. When it was over, Rick walked the casket. He placed his hand on it. "I laughed," he whispered, "and you still taught me." Rick sold the dealership 3 years later, retired comfortably. But wealth wasn't what stayed with him. It was the lesson. Never judge the quiet man. Never confuse appearance with value. Never laugh before you listen. Because sometimes the poorest-looking person in the room is the richest person you will ever meet. The real impact didn't happen in the dealership. It happened years later, on farms Rick would never have visited before, because Walter's decision didn't stop at 12 tractors. It multiplied. One of the first farmers Walter helped was Sarah Mitchell. At 29, she had nothing but rented land, student debt, and a dream everyone told her was unrealistic. When Walter handed her the keys to a tractor worth more than her annual salary, she asked the same question Rick once did. "Why me?" Walter answered calmly, "Because someone helped me once, and because you'll help someone else later." Sarah didn't just farm. She paid attention. She saved aggressively. She avoided debt. She fixed instead of replacing. Within 5 years, she owned land. Within 10, she owned enough land to hire help. And then she did something that shocked people. She bought a used tractor at auction, not for herself. For a 24-year-old woman trying to start farming who had been rejected by 3 banks, Sarah sold it to her at cost. 0 interest. Sound familiar? Another farmer, David Rodriguez, did the same. Then Thomas Murphy. Then Michael Chun. By 2024, the foundation had officially helped 47 farmers. Unofficially, the number was much higher, because the real system wasn't money. It was mindset. Walter taught people to buy during panic, save during good years, avoid debt even when it's offered, help quietly, never advertise wealth, and most importantly, never confuse success with appearance. Rick began tracking something out of curiosity. Every farmer helped by the foundation. Not one went bankrupt. Not one lost their land. Not one defaulted. Meanwhile, farms around them, bigger farms, flashier farms, were collapsing under debt. Rick finally understood. The industry wasn't broken. It was misaligned. It rewarded image. Walter rewarded discipline. It chased scale. Walter chased sustainability. It worshiped growth. Walter respected survival. At one conference, a young salesman asked Rick, "How do you know if a farmer is worth backing?" Rick answered without hesitation, "Look at how they treat what they already have." That line spread. So did the story. But here's the thing. Most people never knew Walter's name. He didn't want statues, didn't want interviews, didn't want credit. He wanted results. And the results were everywhere. Farms that shouldn't exist, still standing. Families that should have quit, still farming. Young people who should have given up, thriving. All because one man in dirty boots didn't try to look rich. And one dealer laughed instead of listening. Walter proved something most people learn too late. Money doesn't make you powerful. Patience does. And the greatest legacy isn't what you own. It's who stands taller, because you helped them stand. The last time Rick Stevens spoke about Walter Price, his voice cracked, not because of money, because of regret. "I laughed," Rick said. "I laughed at a man who had already figured out life." Walter never corrected people, never defended himself, never explained his wealth, never tried to look important. He let people believe whatever they wanted because he understood something most people don't. If someone judges you by appearance, they're telling you who they are, not who you are. Walter died in 2019. No headlines, no business magazine covers, no viral posts. But his funeral was standing room only. Farmers came from 5 states. Not bankers, not executives, not politicians. Farmers, men and women who were still farming. Because Walter once said, "I believe in you." That belief turned into land, turned into families staying together, turned into futures that didn't collapse under debt. Today, tractors bought with Walter's money are still working fields he never saw. Kids are growing up on farms. That wouldn't exist without him. And most people driving past those farms will never know his name. That's exactly how Walter wanted it. Because real wealth doesn't need witnesses. It doesn't announce itself. It doesn't demand respect. It works quietly, patiently, relentlessly. Rick Stevens learned that lesson too late, but he learned it well. Now, every time a farmer walks into a dealership, dirty boots, old jacket, tired eyes, Rick listens, because the man who looks poor might already be rich, and the man who looks insignificant might be building a legacy that outlives them both. The farmer asked to buy 12 tractors. The dealer laughed, and the laugh cost him his assumptions. That moment didn't create Walter's wealth. It revealed it. Sometimes the people you underestimate are the ones rewriting the future. Quietly,